Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Big Dreams, Great Teams podcast. Today I have Jane McFadden, who is an entrepreneur, former psychologist, author, neurodiversity specialist, and neuroscientist. She switched from traditional psychology to writing her first online program for veterans with PTSD back in 2019. And that little idea turned into a business that is now the largest psychology company in Australia, and it's well over multiple eight figures. While juggling that business, motherhood, and life, Jane battled burnout, stress, and anxiety and received the shock diagnosis of ADHD in 2022 and later autism. Both that answered a lot of questions and at the same time ignited a new passion for helping women and girls avoid being misdiagnosed and wrongly medicated. And this project is her podcast called ADHD Mums, which unsurprisingly quickly raced to number 2 on the charts. Jane is amazing. I've had the great privilege of supporting her in the early stages of both her businesses. And although she'll hate me saying this, she's an absolute powerhouse and an incredible businesswoman. With so many female entrepreneurs now identifying with or exploring an ADHD diagnosis, I've brought Jane onto the podcast to share her personal experience and her academic and scientific knowledge with all of us. And today we're talking about ADHD, entrepreneurship, team, business, all the things. So a very big warm welcome to you, Jane. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Paula. This is so exciting, isn't it, to actually be doing this together after so long?
Absolutely. So excited. Would you like to share I've obviously talked a little bit about your background, but there's just so much more to it, so much more flavor and information to it. Would you like to share by telling us your story, a little bit about your business, your life, being a mum, all the things?
Yeah, sure. It's hard to know where to start, and ADHD, you're kind of all over the place. Probably, I think for me, ADHD has made it difficult for me to work in traditional settings. And letting go of that has been a really big thing because I remember being 21, working in recruitment, and I received all these awards and accolades, all the dopamines coming in, but I couldn't sustain. And I only lasted, 12 months, and I had this typical ADHD career, I think, in recruitment. It was fast and hot and lots of money, and then I burnt. I struggled to maintain, and I also have always been a deep thinker. So I remember the first year thinking, wow, so I'm going to work in the dark and I'm coming home in the dark and I haven't seen the sun. And is this what life is? Like that just hit me. And when I decided to do something different, and I went overseas initially and worked as a flight attendant internationally, and I had all these random things that I did, a lot of people were saying to me, why aren't you building a resume? Why aren't you doing the corporate thing? Why aren't you practicing as a psychologist? Why did you even get a degree if you're going to wander around like you are? And sometimes people would ring me and I'd moved states in that time. Like I'd be living in Sydney, in Manly. I'd talk to a friend a month later. I'd be living in Melbourne. Then I've left to Perth and I'm working internationally. And it sounded glamorous in some ways, but it was also a really jarring experience when I kept seeing over and over again that I wasn't able to stick at things. So it looks exciting, and yes, it is exciting, but it wasn't that I was going so well. It was that I couldn't stick to anything, and I became very roller coastery right up front. So working in my own business, I've really had to do that from when I was 24, and I started up a coaching business, which it's hard to know. When you sent me through the questions, I was trying to strip back success and where it's come from and how it's happened. And I think neurodivergent people have sometimes got a really incredible work ethic, the ability to keep going. Like I'm able to focus and do things for periods of time that I don't think many other people can do. But on the other side of it, sticking to something and consistency is a real problem for me. And sometimes that real step, one in front of the other, one in front of the other, is really important. And I struggle with that part. So eventually meeting my husband, who's very stable, has been a really big thing for me. So sometimes I look at success and the businesses that I've grown and built, and I really have to credit, you have to have a stable rock beside you, because it was only when I met him that I was able to actually stick at something, because I wasn't able to move houses anymore, move locations anymore. I've got one person, I've got two, I've got three, I've got four people at tow. You can no longer do that. And that can be really jarring because you're used to just creating more problems. I would just go create another thing to do rather than deal with my problems. So I think success has always come with someone very stable next to me too, because I didn't achieve that much success until I met him. I just created a lot of things.
Love that. So let's talk about Body and Mind Online, which is the psychology business that you sort of started back in 2019. What do you remember about those first few years, I guess, when you were in startup mode?
My hubby and I are both very successful, driven people, and we had been searching for an opportunity in that space for like 2 years. So, yes, it was an idea. It was probably the 50th idea, and it was probably the fourth idea that I'd floated properly that hadn't worked out. So, I'd already floated 3 or 4 ideas, worked really hard at them that hadn't worked out. So, when I came up with that last one, I really felt in my gut that this is the one. And the timing was really unfortunate because I was heavily pregnant and I had 2 kids under 3, and it was unfortunate timing. And I think the way the world works, I was lucky it was still there because I'd had a cesarean. I was very unwell. I had to go back to hospital. We have no family. We had no money. So you don't have any support, right? So finally it hit me like when I had Billy was 6 weeks old and I had 3 kids under 3.5. Because we'd been searching for that opportunity for so long, I didn't feel like it was something I could pass up. And if I had a sister or, a friend, I would have told them to leave it and be with my kids, which is what every single person possible told me to do. But I couldn't because I knew that this was the opportunity I was waiting for. And my hubby and I had talked about having 4 kids. And I was pretty confident that if I did this business properly, I would not have a 4th child. And it was a massive sacrifice for me. And I did actually talk to my hubby and say, if this doesn't work out, you owe me a baby. And I don't care what the age gap is, you owe me a fucking baby. And we talked about that. We laugh about it now. At that time, everybody told me it wasn't a good idea, except for my husband, who is always along the ride with me. And it was a massive deal for us because the business was very expensive up front. It was a massive capital. We had to put all of our money in, and every month we lost money for nearly 18 months. We lost money every month for 18 months. And we didn't make $1 for 18 months, I think it was. And because everything that we made had to go straight back in. I mean, we had to put money in every month, but we didn't have any money because my husband's business, he was working in a gym, and everything that he did went straight back into Body and Mind. And we were in all sorts of pain financially. We had just bought a house, which was a massive achievement for us, and we didn't have a very high income. So we would get to the end of the week and, we would say, okay, what are we going to eat? Like, let's order online. And it became really obvious to us with 3 kids under 3 that we can no longer afford to order from Coles. So, and that was jarring. I remember we needed to buy like a seat, like a chair, and it was like $100. We couldn't afford it. And we had to go through the gym at times and try and find an old treadmill or something to sell. We'd take the cash and go to Aldi with 3 kids under 3.5 and try and figure out what we could do financially. So it was like persistence was really hard. And my hubby kept saying to me, is it going to be all right? Is it going to be all right? And at times I didn't know if it was going to be all right, but I just kept saying, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. But honestly, I didn't know a lot of the time. And we did all of the planning in advance of the model, and it just looked so good, but in Excel spreadsheets, not reality. And there were so many problems in the beginning. I think when I met you, Paula, we were maybe 6 months in, and there were so many struggles. I'd never managed staff before. So I'd worked in a business where I might have a subcontractor here and there, but I'd largely run my own ship and I do all the work myself. And I remember the first staff member I hired who's still there at the company, and I had Billy and he was crying and I was breastfeeding him, and I had an old like butcher piece of paper sticky taped to a brick wall and with a permanent marker. And I was talking to the staff member and she was holding my baby while he cried. I was talking over the top of him, attempting to breastfeed. And that was what our first training day was like. So she was a great hire and she's still there. And managing her, I think, well, you helped me with managing her because I can't remember if you were there when I first recruited her.
No, you had her by the time we chatted.
Yeah, I had her, but I had no idea what I was doing. She had no KPIs. I'm pretty confident I wasn't even paying her the legal wage, which she pulled me up on because I could have got sued. And there was all these processes and management that had no idea what to do. And the business, to make money, we had to have practitioners, but we had to hire them. And I couldn't figure out, because at that time I thought, oh, well, any practitioner is a good practitioner. Like, I don't know, we just need warm bodies. And I think working with you for the first time was when I actually went, okay, well, actually, I'm looking for a really specific type of practitioner, and they needed this personality. And what I was finding was I was recruiting the wrong people, training them in the wrong way, and then they weren't performing or they were leaving, and the whole thing was a giant waste of time. Also, when we got to about 10 practitioners, I remember saying to you, I just don't think I can do this anymore because they kept ringing me all the time. And you were like, okay, well, what are the questions? Let's write them out. What are the boundaries? What boundaries do you have? And I didn't understand any of that either. So it was really flying an aeroplane and fixing it in the air kind of scenario when I was working with you, where you were like, okay, well, where are we at now? And it was just this changing landscape. And I think the amount of stress I was under was huge. And yes, I have a business partner who helped a lot as well. And we owned that 50-50 at that time. However, he had a really different role and he wasn't in the day-to-day management. So I think I only had you that I was honest with because I didn't want to terrify my husband, and I couldn't be honest with our only contractor. And I remember you going, well, how can we get some money coming in? How do you make money? And I hadn't even thought of, let's just start there. I mean, it just felt so overwhelming at that time.
Yeah. So, love, thank you for that share. And, there's so much I'd love to unpack in that. In hindsight, now looking back at that period, what were the now obvious ADHD and autistic kind of tendencies or signs or the way you were working that were showing up that probably now feel obvious, but at the time you were just in the motions?
There's still things that I do now that I was doing back then that I struggle to, at least I'm aware of it now. But, at that time, I kind of thought any warm body is a good body. Like, any psychologist will do, any admin person is good. And when you're so stressed out and overwhelmed, it's just like, just tick that lot off. And I have been known still to do that in terms of staff. Like, that will do. That's an admin person. That's a whole. That will work. And that's still a problem, is jumping in. And also, because I'm so intense and because I had so much skin in the game, clearly, I've got so much on the line and I'm working, 60 hours a minimum a week with kids up all night, all the time, right? It was a relentless, relentless time. I also had if you're not helping me, get out of my way kind of attitude. And that didn't necessarily help me all the time, because getting an external contractor on board with what I want them to do is difficult when I have a very direct way of talking. And if someone's not performing and they're an external contractor, I got in trouble multiple times. Even the little things that seem obvious to other people, but I just felt like with an external contractor, I'm paying them, do it. And I didn't feel the need to sugarcoat it like I do with a family member or a friend. I couldn't understand why that you need to behave like that in a certain way. I was like, well, they're not doing anything good, so I'm just going to tell them. And a lot of the time I felt very frustrated, very impatient, because my brain is so fast and I'm so far more in than anyone else. There is no one that would have the knowledge that I would have. So the slowdown factor to bring in and collaborate with externals that we desperately needed has still been a challenge for me, even at the retreat we had 6 months ago. I'm very aware that there was a lot of people that I've offended previously and I had to apologize to. However, in saying that, I also am who I am. And I spoke to a few people before I got there and I said, just to let you know, you're inviting me. I can rein in some things and I'll do my best. But you're asking me to attend on a 12-hour day and I can't dampen my personality all day. Like, you're inviting me, you want my brain. You can't pick and choose what you get. So I suppose disclosing that has been good, but I do still feel like there's a lot of people that want the fast brain, they want them problem solver, but yet when there's a discussion that I think is pointless, it's difficult for me to sit and listen and have the patience. where I'm just like, I can't understand where we're going with this. This doesn't make any sense. And why haven't you done your homework before arriving? It's difficult for me when I have such high expectations of myself to not hold everybody else to those same levels. And that's been a problem for me because external contractors are not as invested as you. But if I'm looking at the amount of money I'm paying them, I'm like, well, why haven't you done that? Why don't you know that? And it's been difficult for me to have the patience to communicate in a way that makes people feel good about themselves when I'm seeing holes. And that still is a problem, is not to just point out all of the weaknesses, which is a neurodivergent thing to do.
Definitely. I think you're probably being a little bit harder on yourself than certainly what I saw from an outsider's perspective, certainly back then. And I guess, to share with everybody what I observed about you back then was that you were super fast moving. And, those highs that you're saying you were making going, that'll do. I think that there was definitely a huge assumption that came to the table. You seem lovely, so you're capable. There's that sort of thing that also came with it. And I think the difference now, having working together sort of now, 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, is there's a much more awareness around, hey, I'm like this, I've got a tendency to do this. Should I be pausing, or can I run with this feeling I've got, etc.? So, definitely a lot of those things that you talked about, the focusing on the negative and I guess all those things, and being really straight talking and really direct, all those things can be a huge positive as well. And I guess, for me, working with you now post-diagnosis, the big difference I've noticed is the awareness. I've got a tendency to do this. Is that what's happening now? Or actually is this, a feeling or a thought that I should act on and run with?
Yeah, it's difficult though, because I feel like I've almost lost a bit of confidence, because when you are unaware, it doesn't occur to you that there's a problem. And now it's like a second guess constantly, where I've noticed, as you pointed out, like I had a friend the other day who's also autistic, and she said to me something about she hired somebody and they had done the wrong thing by her. Let's say, I think it was a cleaner, and something had happened. It was a small example, but I said, oh, did you ask those questions, etc., etc.? And she said, I actually did ask them, but I couldn't tell whether they were genuine or not. And that's been a real issue for me, because I think autistic people are very, very straightforward. We're either happy with you or we're not. And we let you know. At least you know where you stand. Like, I don't think anyone would ever walk away from me having me been really nice to them and then I'm actually upset with them. I'm very upfront and very assertive, and not necessarily in a mean way. I just tell people at the end of meetings, no, I don't think I want to work with you, actually. And I know that most people then wait time and then pretend to think about it and then send an email. I just find it to be a waste of time. So when I'm on Zoom with somebody, I had, a publisher that wanted to do some nonfiction books with me, and they told me what I would make per book. And I said, well, that's $2. I'll just sell it myself. It doesn't seem like a very good thing to do. And I could see that she was completely thrown, that I'd actually just said to her, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to. She goes, don't you want to think about it and then email me? I said, oh, not really. So I think sometimes with autistic people, we don't realize that other people are doing that. And that can be also really confusing, because if someone says to me, yes, for example, I'll have you on my podcast, but I'd like to do it later in the year, I will follow them up later in the year and not know that that's actually not what they mean. They mean, I don't want to have you on the podcast. I don't know that. So now I'm like second guessing a lot of the time. Is it me? Did I not read the cues? And that can be helpful, but I still haven't figured out how to do it. And it basically means I need to check in with somebody. But however, working with someone like you, Paula, you've helped me get my amazing online business manager to actually sit in on a meeting and go, is this person good or not? How is this working? Because maybe that's just what I need to do, because I'm actually not sure at this point if I'm ever going to learn that skill.
And I think that's completely fine, because, we can't be amazing at everything. And that's the whole building a support system. It's like, what do I think I can get better at? What do I want to get better at? What do I want to learn how to do? Actually, where do I just want to get someone else and have somebody either that I'm passing that to, or they're just sitting alongside me while we make that decision together. And I think that's perfect. And that's completely the way it should be with a support system. So we're throwing around some language. I've talked about you being autistic and having ADHD. And I know many of us are trying to learn the right language and know the right things to say. So I guess I want to just throw out there and say, is that the right way to talk about it? Are there some rules that we can all know? And please correct me if I say something in the wrong way.
Oh, you know what? I probably have a bit of a different take on it because I think that any person that talks about autism is a great person. You're probably not going to talk about it in the right way. I have the same experience with transgender and gender. I am not across all of the acronyms. I have no idea, but I've always got a great intention when I say it. I'm always like, I don't know gender diverse. But for me, the fact that I'm actually mentioning gender diverse, even though I don't know how to talk about it, is acknowledging that I'm there. So for people generally who are autistic, like to talk about themselves as I am autistic. I don't have autism because it's not a cancer diagnosis. However, if people are talking about autism or being neurodivergent, I just think it's great. And I don't pull anybody up necessarily because I just think let's not chip people for mentioning something that's not talked about. And breaking the stigma is what's important. And basically, anybody, now we're talking about 50% of the population in Australia is neurodiverse. If we take into account anxiety, depression, trauma, all of the things, we would be looking at nearly 50% of the population, which is why we need to look at how society views neurodivergent people and cater to everybody. This isn't about people diagnosed. This is about making the world better for everybody. So generally, we don't like to be spoken about as having autism or it being a disorder, something that needs to be cured. One of the biggest things about being diagnosed as autistic is that you have an understanding and awareness of who you are. And because the label that you've given yourself is worse, I think, than being told you're autistic, because you feel like there's something wrong with you. Like, for example, for me, what I do to regulate, like regulate emotion, like make yourself feel good, that's just a way of saying relax, chill out, is I like to work. And most people would feel that's odd. And in all the therapy I've done since I was 14 years old, they have all told me that that is not an effective way of relaxing. So then you're told the ways that you should relax. I can't relax that way. I have to be doing something for me to relax. I don't necessarily want to do my tax return to relax, but I like to listen to music. I like to chill out. I like to tick things off my to-do list. I like to do it in my own pace. And I like to be not interrupted is a really big thing for me. I like to tidy my house, not interrupted by children. That's regulating for me. So being diagnosed neurodivergent has been great because it's great to, I suppose, no longer feel like you're failing at life. You're failing at therapy. You can't even relax. You can't even do the basics that you're being told to do. And I'm like, wow, I'm a psychologist and I still can't do mindfulness. You feel like you just suck at everything. That's how I felt. I also felt a little crazy. Like I remember driving down to North Lakes in Body and Mind, and the business was incredibly successful at that point. And I had already worked as the CEO, and I had quit the CEO position mainly because I think that there's a point where a business becomes corporate that it does become male dominated, in my experience. And having done the amount of work that I've done in that business and then to be not acknowledged, or let's say used for your ideas and then cast aside, that's a whole nother thing. So I stepped away from the CEO position, which was difficult, but I think was the right decision. And I didn't have to be in that position anymore. They were 14-hour days. I could choose, and that was a luxury. But I came down to Brisbane as the founder. They would often use me as the founder. The founder's coming down and it will be this big deal, which was really embarrassing, to be honest, because I remember going down there in this secondhand $5,000 car as the founder. And I remember pulling up with this old beat up car. And I remember parking badly, nearly hitting another car, because that's who I am. I've got no spatial recognition. And I knew I had ADHD, but I hadn't told anybody because I was embarrassed. And I nearly hit all the cars in front of me. And then I was like, didn't really give a shit, to be honest. But then I got out of the car and realized that all of the staff were getting coffee in front of the car. And I was like, oh, shit. So then I thought, I'll just pretend to be someone else and walk in the other direction, right? Thinking no one will notice me. Oh, no, people did notice me straight away and said, oh, there's Jane. I was like, oh, my God, I really needed a minute here. So then I had to pretend it was all fine and, fake, fake, fake. And I was so embarrassed. And then I actually held it together okay during that training. I thought, okay, I'm all right. I'm all right. But I remember I meant to leave, and it's always the little things that get me. And I had everything in my hand and it was a push-pull door. Now I'm spatially horrific and I could not work out the push-pull door. And I was in front of a room full of people. The founder, I'd actually managed to go quite well there, like hold it together, because it's the little things that get me, like simple maths, like 8 + 6. I have dyscalculia. I can't figure out maths. So it becomes embarrassing when you're in big meetings and people think you're something important. And then there's a simple thing like 8 + 6. And I'm just like nowhere with it. So it's the simple things that would get me. So I do the push-pull door, dropped everything, couldn't figure it out. Someone had to open the door for me. I picked up all my stuff awkwardly and then left. And I remember thinking, it's just like I can't function normally. Like it's like I'm there problem solving these huge things for everybody. And I'm like, wow, that like I never thought of that before. But it's the parking, arriving, leaving, just having simple lunch, not spilling coffee all over myself, coordinating a push-pull door that would just leave me in a complete mess. So it was always this facade that I had to do. And then I never wanted people to realize how borderline useless I was in other areas because it's just so embarrassing.
It's so interesting. And I guess I can even hear that that's the part your brain was choosing to focus on, as opposed to, the huge complex things that you were just making seem and feel extremely simple for everybody in the room. So it's almost that singular focus or that kind of hyper focus. I'm just going to think about these things as opposed to everything, which I guess we all do, but perhaps not to the same extent.
Yeah, I think it's just a varying level. So this is just my point of view. This isn't necessarily science, but I believe that autistic and ADHD people are clearly have impacted hugely over the world. There's all these, people talking about now. Albert Einstein was autistic. And there is a way that, they talk about a genius is made in 30,000 hours, like a genius in an area. But if you have an ADHD or an autistic person, they get to 30,000 hours much quicker than a neurotypical person. So they go from 0 to 100 real quick. And the amount of focus that they can have and the amount of detail, autistic people in their area are incredibly detailed. I can photographically quote off the NDIS, the DVA legislation, the Medicare legislation without even thinking about it. I can talk to people and let them know, okay, well, in that scenario, I would do this because of this. And I can just search it all through my brain. So that level of expertise in an area of like basically having an encyclopedia of a person that you can draw on in a health business that is run on government legislation is incredible. However, also that person usually has massive holes elsewhere. So you really got to utilize them in specific areas, but then it's embarrassing when you're that person and you're at that level over here, but then somewhere else you're nowhere. And again, if you don't have a diagnosis, you just feel stupid. And you just feel so stupid all the time. And then you have to cover it up constantly. So it's so great to be in your own business if you are neurodivergent, because you can kind of pick and choose a little bit what you can do. And I find working regulating, because I'm in an area that I'm so passionate about, but I wouldn't be able to work corporate life. I would be fired instantly. There's no way I could do even a simple corporate or office job at all.
And I think what you're talking about is really interesting, because as entrepreneurs, certainly at first, we are expected to do all the things. I've started 3 businesses in the last 14 years. And, I remember sort of, being the cleaner, being the tech person, being the this, all the things. But then you reach a point, and what to your point is when you realize that you actually don't have to do it all. And it's tricky because then you're weighing up paying myself, paying someone else, blah, blah, blah. But actually, nobody is actually good at everything. And in particular, so if you're sitting there and you're listening and thinking, I'm exactly like this, then there's probably even more reason to actually think, well, who do you need to put around you? What do you need to stop doing so you can stop feeling, silly with inverted commas in, those areas, etc., and actually just focus more on what you do well and really just put your foot down the pedal there.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, that's great for soul trading, isn't it? When you can just do the thing that you like doing on repeat. And autistic people have a great way of being able to do a lot of repetition. That's why I think autistic people are so great at music. They can just practice and practice and practice. It's regulating. But yeah, you do have to have the right team. But then it can be tricky because you've got to generate the income to get the team. And until you get there, it's really difficult to be able to do that. And I suppose having the right team around you that you can trust is tricky as well when you're not necessarily great at doing that.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned to me somewhere that collaborating or engaging or encouraging people on the team who aren't particularly, well performing or high performing or aren't particularly energizing was just something that you were like, nah, I don't have time for this.
I just can't do it.
Yep.
I'm awful at managing people. I really am. I think I just don't. I'm very bad at small talk. It can be really problematic and it can feel really forced because I'm like, okay, well, I think in performance management, you're supposed to do a shit sandwich. Then I have to think of something fake that I thought they'd be good. It would come off not very genuine. And then I'd talk about the shit part for really long, probably passionately. And then at the end, I'd be like, but I really enjoy having you on the team. And I'd just be like, this just doesn't feel like, I'm just woeful at this. And, it just doesn't come off as genuine. And even, on Instagram, I've had to hire people to comment back. So when I do a reel or something and then they have a small share or how do you feel about this or whatever, I struggle to write back appropriately small talk, because for me, I'm either going to write a 1-page document for the answer and I've basically created an education piece for that one person, or I'm going to put an emoticon and not know what to say. Like I've got one speed or the other, because I'm like, well, that's a really large problem. And so when I first started at ADHD Mums, I would just solve people's problems on the comments, because I thought, well, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to write back to every comment. So the amount of value people got was great, because I just did individual with consulting with them on every comment, because I didn't know how to do one or the other.
Yes, which is now being turned into ebooks and books and all the things, for the record, everybody. It's not just comments on a thread. But yeah, so I guess I've heard you talk about lots of different sort of signs and how you were showing up, struggling with small talk, working really long and hard, sort of really going deep on things, struggling to hire the right people and thinking anybody will do, or potentially not realizing that there's more to it. Is there anything else, I guess, as far as like common signs that people can, say for themselves, or the way they're operating that's common for people, with ADHD who might be curious or listening?
I think burnout would be the biggest one. I would actually love to talk to a neurotypical person about burnout, because I can't understand how it would ever be similar. An ADHD person is going to really struggle with basically being consistent, small steps every day. I was talking to someone the other day about how neurotypical children, I believe, I don't know very many, do their homework like a little bit at a time, or a person will do the work a little bit at a time, and then they will not be stressed out. They'll complete it and it will all be great. And I can't have an understanding of how people do that. Boundaries are really difficult. I wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, my brain is on and I can't sleep because I just get so excited. And so when you have that type of brain, you really can understand why kids get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, because they're excited. They're awake. And I can't understand how people relax and go back to sleep. So then I would start work at 3 o'clock in the morning. I love it. I would do nice 3 or 4 hours before anyone gets up. But that's not a normal behavior. And that's a way of creating a lot of fatigue. So I think roller coaster of emotions, up and down, working really hard. Then I'm so burnt out, I can't get out of bed. Those are all ADHD type of vibes. However, ADHD can just be really inattentive too, like just creating a task, starting a task, or I've spoken to you about prioritizing a task is a real issue for me. I will just write down 17 pages of things that I need to do, and I'll give myself 3 hours, and then I'll just berate myself at the end for why I didn't get it done. Yet I've done more in one day than someone else would do in a week, but it's never enough. I really like to talk about the high performance side of ADHD because I don't think it's spoken about enough. And I get a lot of positivity for that. And a lot of people say, what's the secret to your success? How can I do similar? And I usually say something like, I don't think my ADHD is a recipe for anyone's happiness. Yes, there's some successful parts to it, but I think I would be happier if I was neurotypical. I think it would be easier for me. I think I would be simpler, and I would probably live a simpler, happier life, because there's a deep thinking, there's a drive, there's a hyperactivity that you can never shut off. And then you've got the other side of that, which is a big internal struggle on depression, anxiety, stress, and then thinking, I'm on this mouse wheel. How do I get off? How do I get off? So for me, I create another business, I'd sell it, and I'd make lots of money, and then I'd be bored for a few weeks and I'd start another one. So it's like this whole big cycle of life. And you're like, I'm in this rinse and repeat, and I don't know how to get off.
So you've started 2 really successful businesses. It sounds like you've had at least 4 to 5 kind of ideas, and you're on your 3rd, aren't you?
This would be my 4th.
Your 4th, okay.
Because I ran the NDIS company too. Again, staff. I struggled with staff and errors, I think, managing staff as well. And it got to a point where I actually looked at it and thought, structurally, I am not good at managing staff. And I think this is just a staff heavy model. And that for me, I just thought, this is a great business, but this is a staff reliant, heavy staff. And I also was realizing that I wasn't really that person, because the staff were like, oh, what are we doing for our Christmas party? And I was like, I don't know, like working. Like I couldn't understand, like, what do you mean? Like, what are we doing? They wanted to really, I think, have those engagement, have those coffees, and I would just dread it. I would just be like, this is a waste of time in my mind. I'd have to put on this front, pretend to be this person. I remember just thinking, I just don't know how I can get through this, because it felt so forced and fake. And then I watch people that genuinely love their team, and they're genuinely those people and they love it. And I just thought, I'm not probably the right personality to have that team, I don't think.
Totally.
And I ultimately sold that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is that some business models require a lot of people and to function, to be profitable, to get to scale. And for you, you lean towards building those sorts of businesses, which is great. But then it gets to a point where it's like, well, you can't lead them anymore. And we need to then hire in either a CEO or a GM or somebody else to step in between you and them, or you sell them. And either way, it's still absolute success. And I think it's that awareness of self going, I don't want to continue to put on a mask here or try to be someone that I don't want to be on a daily basis, because that's not life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that awareness has been great, because ADHD mum stays then me, one to many. And a lot of people ask for webinars, one to ones. And I'm like, I actually am not, like, I put in so much time to the podcast, and I would love to have other people run those for me. But I have to be realistic about my energy levels. And I know that if I was to run a monthly webinar, I would then be burnt out, in terms of that would take so much energy, as opposed to creating more content, creating more ebooks, creating more episodes, which is me researching in my happy place. But once I get in front of people and I have to put on the face, I just struggle. And even a couple of people have seen me kind of out and about on the Sunshine Coast. And I talk about one of them that was recently, I was in Big W and I had lost my trolley and I had lost my daughter. And I was walking around getting slightly panicked. You know how you like pretending you're fine, but really like starting to panic. And I was in Big W and I was like, Gigi, like pretending to be calm. But really I was like, I'm going to give this 5 minutes. I'm about to call the police. I was kind of yelling and I was kind of escalating. And I was like, Gigi, I don't know where the trolley is. I don't know where you are. Can you just let me know where you are? And I was kind of escalating. And then this woman came up to me. She like grabbed my arm. She was like, I know who you are. And I'm totally fine that you've lost your trolley. Can I give you a hand? And I just said, this is just the most bizarre. She's like, this has just made my day, the fact that you've lost your child in your trolley, and I'm going to help you find them in Big W. And we had a good laugh about it, but I do struggle to be that person all the time. Like, I find it hard. I don't know how people do the one-to-ones all the time. I don't think I can do it.
Love that. So with this current business, you're clear that there can't be loads of people. And for the record, you are managing the existing people well, the ones you've got, and the people who are supporting you, like, and the subcontractors and the people sort of, bringing in the specialist skill that you need. And I guess you're clear that there isn't never going to be loads of people here, because that's not the sort of business that I'm wanting to build now. And this is probably slightly more of a passion project than any sort of big thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, the podcast model kind of feeds into, webinars and, the lives and all the stuff. And I think, you've been really good at like, okay, well, do you want to actually do that? So, okay, imagine it's Monday, it's 6 o'clock, there's going to be a webinar starting, you have to switch on. And I'm like, I could probably do it like with a few hours notice if I felt like it. But if I knew it was scheduled and I had to do it all the time, I think I'd struggle. So I think you and I went over, well, maybe that content is online content that people can download. Maybe it's not live. And I think when you get really clear around what you want it to be, it's so much easier, rather than like, oh, well, that's how it goes, you should do that. Whereas, I think being really realistic, and I think one time, I can't remember when it was, years ago, you said to me, I said, oh, I'm going to fly here somewhere once a month or something. And you said to me, oh, but do you want to do that? And I said, yeah, that sounds, I'll be fine with that. And then you said to me, yeah, but like, if you actually think about that, so every 3 weeks, you would then know that in a few days you would have to fly. And it stuck with me because I did it one time and then I came back and I was like, yeah, no, I don't want to do that every like 4 weeks. That's actually, I think I was just imagining sitting with my phone alone in a, airplane lounge away from my family, my children, nice and quiet with a coffee. I thought, oh, that would be brilliant. But actually, when I did it one time, I was like, that was actually really draining. And if I want to do self-care, maybe I should just do self-care, not fly somewhere.
Totally, because of all the variables as well. Like, all the variables that come into play that might go wrong and be like, oh, is that energy giving or energy taking? Absolutely.
I don't know why I thought that would be great. And you said to me, I don't think that's a good idea. And I was like, oh, I think it'd be fine. Till I did it one time.
One of the things that you mentioned to me recently was that, it was about, you said to me before that you'll have this big long list of things that need to get done and you'll just, put your head down and spend however many hours and get them all done. And prioritizing things, you said the way your brain works, you find that quite tricky. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what you do then to help yourself go, well, what can I work on first? And when is it okay to stop?
Oh, that's tricky. And this has been a problem with my diary management too, and you've been helping with my diary management because it does my head in. Because if it looks too clear, I feel like, oh, I should add more in. If it looks too heavy, then I want to take stuff out and I end up playing with it all day and all night. And I never get my head out of my phone, not because I'm doing anything good, because I'm relentlessly looking at my schedule, because I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to feel at the time. It does my head in. But the priorities I still find tricky. So I'll write a big list, but I have to have certain sections of it. So I'll have a today list and then like a this week list, a this month list. And then I started actually doing a like perfect world list. So again, ADHD thing, or, neurodivergent thing, I'm a real perfectionist. So if I look at a cupboard and I am in the right mood, I will be like, right, well, I'm just going to have to reorganize that whole cupboard. And it doesn't matter what time of the day it is. So when I used to at 5 o'clock, I'd be supposed to be getting dinner. I'd be like, oh, that cupboard's been doing my head in. I'm going to do it. And I'm supposed to be cooking dinner. The kids are everywhere. And I would be just like relentless. I've got to get this cupboard done, which I've just decided to do 10 minutes ago. And then I'm like, everyone needs to stop it so I can finish this cupboard. And it's so inappropriate and weird if you think about why that has suddenly become urgent, because it all seems urgent. So having ADHD and perfectionism is a real problem because you want to do everything all at once. So for me, I have to stop, put it on my list because then it feels like I'm in control. And then I move it in an app to the perfect world list. And that world is one day, if the perfect world existed and I had lots of time, what would I do on that list? And it's been really empowering because I often look at that list and I'm like, most of that is a load of shit. Like all of that seems like not important at all. And I'm so glad I didn't bother with all of that stuff. Or it's become like irrelevant. Like it seemed important that day, but then everything changed and I would have wasted time. So I try and do today and then I'll move it to this week and I try and chunk it. And then often if I get halfway through the day and the day's become really bad and I know I'm not going to get a lot of it done, I'll just move it to this week. And then I'll still get my dopamine hit of checking off the last thing for today's list, even though that's not necessarily real. But I think ADHD, you have that real superhero effect where 8 o'clock in the morning, I think I'm going to be like amazing. And then you put 50 things on there and then you're so upset with yourself that they're not all ticked off. But I think the prioritizing is always hard, always really hard. But, I think you're helping me do that. Helps me, definitely, especially because I keep putting all my own stuff last, like diary management. You're like, can we move that up a bit? And, the online business manager is really good too that you help me hire. So she is great at, like, I have just started saying to her now, I'm just going to add stuff onto your list, but could you just prioritize your time? Because I know that she knows, I can see her knowing. And I think I don't want to then derail her. She actually has a better idea than I do. So after I've spent time building that trust with her, I just say, look, I think you should just do your own priorities, please, which is probably a relief for her. She's probably like, oh, thank God.
Totally. And if somebody understands the bigger goals and has the bigger picture knowledge, then they actually can prioritize well because they understand why this might be a priority. This may not be a priority. So actually that's great delegating on your behalf because they've got the bigger picture and they've got the concepts there, which allows them to do it. And you can kind of be a bit more hands off and go, these are all the things in my brain. You put them in order, knowing that we need to track from point A to point C. Let's go.
Yeah, but I think you've pointed out to me about the difference between a thinker. So, that's been a really big thing for me because I would go ahead and let them do that, but I wouldn't have hired a thinker. I would just hire like a VA who is just doing exactly what I've asked. And then I would just expect them to just prioritize. But actually what they're doing is just going from the oldest task to the first or something. And then I'd be confused why they're not doing it in the right way. So I think when you said to me, you really need to hire a thinker and we need to, pay appropriately and look for that right person, that's been a real game changer for me, because I always assumed that people were thinkers and I didn't realize that they didn't do it that way.
Absolutely. And for everybody listening, thinker versus a doer. Some people will just do what you've asked them to do in the order that you've presented it, versus somebody who'll think about what you've asked them to do and they'll put that into the context of the bigger goals and the other things they're thinking about. And there's, some people can do both, but I think as entrepreneurs, many of us just assume everybody does both because that's what we do. Whereas actually we need to think about, and what Jane did was actually think about, no, I actually need a thinker. I don't want to be doing the thinking for them the whole time because that weighs too heavy on me. So I want them to do the thinking, help me with the thinking, and do the doing as well.
Yeah, but I think I was hiring the doers and just assuming they were thinkers. I
Yep.
think I just assumed, how could you just do blindly? Like I couldn't even understand. And I think that might be a neurodivergent thing. Like it didn't occur to me. They wouldn't have thought through everything. But yeah, when you're hiring someone, maybe offshore, I can't believe now I just made that assumption.
Yeah. Well, it's all these things that we learn that become really obvious in hindsight, but they're new. They're new until we do them and we actually understand them. Gosh, we've talked about so much today and it's been so valuable for everybody listening who's entrepreneur. Maybe they identify with being an ADHD. Maybe they're married to an ADHD person, undiagnosed like I am. Or, just what is the one message you'd like them to hear and walk away with today?
I think awareness, even if you self-diagnose, I think self-diagnosis is so important. And if someone says to me, I think I have ADHD, I've done all the screeners, but I haven't gone and got diagnosed, I think that is just as important and just as important to validate their experience as a proper, in air quoting, diagnosis. And not everybody wants to try medication. Not everybody can, for health reasons. So it's not about lining up for a year and spending all the money on a diagnosis and taking medication or not. It's about being aware how your brain works, because you only get a diagnosis from a psychiatrist if it affects your everyday function. And for some people, it doesn't. It doesn't. And people talk about, why are mums getting diagnosed with ADHD? Well, there's a massive cumulative load. So if you have two people, you've got an ADHD female and an ADHD male, and we're talking heterosexual, they get married. Where does that mental load go? It goes on the woman. We're still stuck there. That's what I see all the time. And so then we've got maybe an undiagnosed male who's still working and living a fairly simple life in terms of point and shoot. I'm working, I am with kids, I'm in a one track, I'm doing one thing at a time. And then you've got a massive mental load on a woman. And then they have, this, I suppose, burnout, depression, anxiety, stress, because they're forgetting things or the executive function's not there. So awareness is really important. And even if you choose not to get a formal diagnosis, being aware of how your brain works is really important. And that's where I think inclusion is so important, because it's not about the child with ADHD getting the support at school. It's about the school supporting all kids to have what they need, because maybe there's a child that's going through, their parents are divorcing. Maybe they've had something traumatizing happening. Maybe they've got a new brother or sister. Okay, well, what do they need? Maybe they need a bit more TLC today. Maybe they need to go for a walk. So it's not about necessarily being diagnosed or not. It's about being aware and being inclusive for everybody. But I think there's so much power in being aware, because there's so many women that I've spoken to that have had huge issues in their marriage and they're now living single mum life. And actually they now realize that there was a lot of undiagnosed ADHD across all parties, which maybe the thing that they wanted their partner to do was something they were not able to do. And then you got to swing around and look at, how does everybody work? And that's where I think awareness of how your brain works and awareness of how your kids and your partners works is important, regardless of a formal diagnosis or medication.
Love. Thank you so much for sharing that and for everything that you've shared today. You are amazing. You know that. I think that. But you are absolutely amazing. Thanks so much for your time. For everybody listening who wants to learn more, obviously they can go over to the ADHD Mums podcast. But where can they come and find you, follow you, listen, download your ebooks, all the things?
Oh, I think, straight on the website would be great. But I'm very active on Instagram. So if you want to see the behind the scenes chaos, that's always a great place to start.
Absolutely. And listen to the ADHD Mums podcast, which I'll link below, because that's such an epic resource. You know, you interview so many amazing people. So thank you for everything that you're doing on that front. It's just, I find it so helpful and informative. So thank you for that.
Oh, thanks for having me, Paula.